So I'm Trisha Pender. I'm an Associate Professor of English and Writing at the University of Newcastle, and I work on women's literary history, which I think of as feminist literary history, and I also work in gender and popular culture. So I've written a book on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I've also written a book on early modern women writers, so women writers from the 16th and 17th century. In the early 90s in Australia was a very exciting time for feminist theory, and a lot of my generation are still very energised by that and the activism that we were doing alongside. So when I went to the United States in 1996, I was, I have to say, a little bit disappointed that there wasn't that kind of energy. And Judith Butler actually came to Stanford to talk, and I spoke to her afterwards and said, I don't get it, like, you're doing this amazing work, why isn't it here? And she said, I think the interesting stuff at the moment is in Australia. I was like, I came all this way. But of course there's fantastic, exciting stuff happening in America, and that's where I first got the chance to teach my own course for the Feminist Studies department. And because I was obsessed with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it was a course called Girls on Film, Cultural Studies in Third Wave Feminism, and it was the biggest privilege to teach, design your own course, get paid for doing it, and that's a course that I ended up teaching at Pace University when I went and taught there, and yeah, it's one of my favourite courses to teach. My introvert, which is probably the core of me, likes the pace of writing and the clarity and the ability to be very purposeful. The part that's extroverted or socially justice facing loves the vocal and the collective and empowering other feminists to be vocal as well. So I oscillate between these, sometimes burn out on the vocal and then retreat to the written, but they're part of a balance. I went back to the past because I wanted my PhD to give me a really rigorous training in thinking about different feminisms. So not assuming that the feminism of the 1990s in America was the same as the 1590s in England, for instance. So I kind of chose my field to give me a bit more training, but also because in English literature, the Renaissance is where we think of as English literature starting, and we just think of it as Shakespeare, Spencer, Milton, Sidney, and there were a lot of women writing there. So I feel like I want to part of what I'm doing is working with other women to rewrite that history. Because in Australia we were all quite isolated, one in one city, one in New Zealand, we brought ourselves together and to do more than the sum of our parts. So we have done really great work together. I'm just finishing a massive 5-year project, which is the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Early Modern Women's Writing, and that brings together over 400 scholars from all over the world who have all written about early modern women's writing. So this is a first for the world, and I think it will probably define the field for, the foreseeable future. I think women can reclaim collaboration so that it's not just about men and it's not just about patriarchy. I think if we cede the tools to men and patriarchy, we're giving away too much of our power, and women are already working together, and the collectives that we are able to make and the cooperatives and the collaborations are super powerful. I don't think we need a separate word. I think we need to take that word back. I don't even know when I found out about feminism. I was thinking about this, and I don't know when it occurred to me, but my mother has told me that I've always been very fierce about justice, and apparently when I was in second class, I wrote the teacher a letter saying that we were going on strike because she hadn't treated us appropriately or something or other. So I was already into collective bargaining when I was little. I feel like I've always been pushing against patriarchy even before I had a language for it, but I don't remember when I first heard the word feminist. It's always been, I guess I'm very privileged to have grown up in a family where we were encouraged to push against any kind of constraints, and a lot of those were gender constraints. But I can't remember when I first came across the word. But I imagine it was like, yes, let's go! There are as many different kinds of feminism as there are people who profess feminism, and I probably have less in common with some types of feminism than I do with, other, activists from the left or the Labour movement or something like that. But I do think everybody's passion for it is like big part of a puzzle together, and I am excited or like hopeful about making alliances between different strands of feminism rather than just kind of being exclusive and pushing people away because we disagree on X or Y. Yeah, there's some very dangerous forms of feminism that I think are dangerous. There's right-wing feminism, there's it's all about me feminism, there's girls can do anything feminism, which I think is that kind of, it's about empowerment, but it ignores structural inequality and it's just about individualism. So to me, those are kind of shocking forms of feminism. I think they undermine the cause of the feminism that I believe in. And that's the kind of feminism, that kind of small L liberal feminism that I find scary, because I feel like it's so easily co-opted into patriarchy. But how do we, now I'm kind of going, how do we make connections even with that kind of feminism? Is there a connection to be made? I do think in ways that it is co-opting feminism for neoliberal capitalism, I do. I don't know how to wrest some of that back, apart from being vocally in dialogue and saying that is not the only feminism, or that is not my feminism, and actively performing or being there doing a different sort of feminism. I am very, very hopeful about the way that gender is playing out in the undergraduates today. Obviously, that's, there can be mature age undergraduates. We have a lot of them at Newcastle. But I would say busting the binary, which has been like a big part of my life, is so much more taken for granted and lived with the new generation of undergraduates. Also, they have taken up the cause of neurodiversity with a vengeance, and that's really exciting to see as well, because I feel that those ideas of hegemonic white wealthy male that's not the norm for these students. So they feel empowered to stand up for themselves and ask for what they need. And I'm very excited about LGBTIQ being almost a norm, I would say, with my students now, and neurodiversity being on the agenda. At the same time, I'm going to sound like a crusty old nana, I think everybody needs to understand about the history of these terms, because obviously queer has been around for a long time. It wasn't invented in their lifetime, and there's still a whole lot to be learnt from the fabulous history of queer activists and scholarship. I feel the same a bit with intersectionalism, which is that my feminism is intersectional, but the idea intersectionalism didn't just happen recently. There's been African American Black women's scholarship, Latinx scholarship for a long time, and that is a big part of how these feminisms that we have now developed. So I feel that understanding that history too, if we just think of it as a presentist phenomenon, we lose a whole lot that's rich and that we need to, survive whatever's coming next. Translation is part of that. It makes me think, how can translation happen in real time as well as on the page? I don't know. Let's find out. I want feminist empowerment to be like a virus, and you're seeding very powerful feminism to go back into communities and flourish. So I think if we mapped the effect of Centre Pompadour, like that would be an interesting, digital mapping exercise. I think that would be very illuminating.